Okay. Steve is going to join us to watch FYI.
Hello, Martin. Hello, Catherine.
Hello, how you going?
How are you?
Good, thank you.
It's going great. We'll
Good.
give it maybe 2 more minutes just to, if anybody else wants to join, just give them a little bit more time.
Easy.
So you can just stare at me being all awkward and stuff. Hello, Steve.
Well, yeah, so everybody knows we did this already once this morning for the USA team, and then this is our second one. So you guys get the practice version.
That'll be
You
polished.
are building us up too much.
Yeah, yeah. Now there's more pressure to do a better job.
hmm
Hello, Jen. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So, I want to do a few introductions. First of all, my name's Timothy. I do work for Wink, but I come from the home service world. Uh, went Have been everything from owner, CFO, controller, general manager for anywhere from $2 million companies all the way up to $30 million companies. Last company, I was there from two all the way up to 30 million, and was there for 10 years. So started up a second location for them, grew that to about $6 million. So and then had come over to Wink. We used Wink Toolbox, the company I was at. So we saw a ton of value that we offer here at Wink, and ended up being customer now one of the members of Wink. So I wanted to introduce a few other people. Jason Shade, he's going to be our guest speaker for today. He's going to be going over being either an operations manager or general manager, kind of what are the key factors that on the operational side, install to sales or sales to install, what are those major factors that led to success? And as he scaled the business, what were some of the pivots or changes that happened along the progress that led to more success? So, and then we also have Dan James. He is on the Wink side as well. He actually is the one who owned the company that I worked at that went from 2 to 30 million, and so sold and ended up investing into Wink. And yeah, so Jason, would you mind introducing yourself a little bit more, maybe a little bit about your background, and then we'll quickly go into our agenda of sales to install, those pivotal moments.
Sure. I think an introduction of myself will help kind of paint a picture of some of the steps that it kind of takes to grow the business because my role in the business changed as we kept growing. At first, I was a service electrician and I would just go out and sell my own work and do my own work. And so I was a kind of a one-man shop. I'd go literally go buy my own parts and put them in and take control of my own day. And as the business grew and we added more people, I would say we found that some people are good at installing and some people are good at selling, or some people are, we wanted to try to get the right person to the right opportunity and maximize what they were good at. And so one of the steps in my career was to sell work and pass it on to somebody else and then lay them out on what needed to be done. And so I would kind of bid a project, plan that project, and source the material, and then hand that off to the team doing the work, introduce the client to that install crew, and have them do that work. But as we kept growing, I was spending less and less time in the field, and I think we'll spend most of the time today talking about my time as an operations manager, uh, building an install department. And that's really a fairly normal thing for some trades. HVAC specifically is the one where that's most common. You'll find that there are people that install air conditioners and people that service them and people that sell them, and they're not always the same person. Usually they're not in that trade, but in like plumbing and electrical, for instance, it can be very, very common to have one guy do it all. The person who provides the estimate also does the work. At our business, we leaned heavily into the salesman and installer split. We wanted to have people do what they do best. We hired some tradesmen who did not want to sell at all. And they might be a really excellent plumber, for instance, certified, skilled, experienced, reliable, and everything you'd be looking for, but they just didn't want to give a bid to a customer. They didn't enjoy that part of the job and having those tough conversations around here's the price for this stressful thing in your life. And so it became easier and easier as we grew to have these options for our team to say, hey, you're really good at selling. We want you to visit as many clients as possible, or you're really good at installing. We'll take that off your plate to have to juggle, you know, this is how much it costs or whatever. So it happened to be a mutually beneficial thing where we were trying to pair the tradesperson with the type of work that they enjoyed, as well as for the business where we were putting them in the role that was most useful for us. We could continue to roll a truck and go visit clients. And if someone couldn't close the job, we could keep doing that over and over again, and we wouldn't be having much success. Our client wouldn't have success. The technician wouldn't have success. The business wouldn't have success. So we were really trying to pair up people with what they did best.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. The goal, I guess the overall objective I want to accomplish with this webinar is there's going to be companies that are multiple different stages as far as number of technicians or revenue or processes. So maybe if you wouldn't mind, and I don't know if you know the revenue, I probably would know the revenue changes along our path, but what were some of those pivotal moments of going from what we'd call a small company to a medium company to a large company? What were the process differences and what implementations did you make? For example, like a sold job process or forms or handoff. What were those major changes that you made along that growth path that you'd say were the pivotal implementations?
Yeah, let me start backwards there and say when we had grown to $30 million, some of the things that we had found that was most useful to get there were systems and processes for splitting up the work that needed to be done. I've mentioned the installers and salespeople. Work on our organizational chart, making sure we had the right support for the right teams. We had our own warehouse at that point that would stock parts. We had a VMI and a consignment set up. We had really kind of dialed in looking for efficiencies because when you start out, there are a lot of inefficiencies. When you're that guy who goes out, sells the work, does it yourself, there's a lot of breaking down. You can't count on other people, so you break down the production of the job and the effort to get the work done, and you're shopping for yourself, right? So if you have a job to do that day and you spend 2 or 3 or even 4 hours going to a supply house 1 or 2 or 3 times, you're really stretching out how hard that is to accomplish, and you're cutting into your profitability and the opportunity cost that the business has because you're not getting to more customers who might need you. They're going to find someone else if you don't have availability in your business. So, I've talked a bit about those steps in my career that the business went through, which was sell and do your own work and just scramble as you go, buy parts as you need it. And then we had to add systems and processes where we would stock our own vans for our technicians. We would, at first, whatever you accumulated on your jobs would be what you had on your van. And that's obviously very inefficient, but deciding what should be on that list, what we keep on the van, stocking it for our technician, counting it for our technician, negotiating those parts down, eventually going to a VMI where we didn't even own those parts and we only paid for them when we used them, were all steps in the process to find increased profitability and increased efficiency on our jobs.
Good. Yeah, thank you. Many may not know what a VMI is, and a lot of their suppliers or their supply houses may not offer that. What is a VMI, and is that something they should be discussing with their vendors?
Yeah, VMI is a vendor managed inventory. If it's not a possibility in your business because of space, maybe something to consider, fixing. If your vendors haven't considered doing that, it's great. It's like a consignment that's managed by the vendor. And so obviously a certain amount of spend is probably needed to make it worth it for that supplier. But what they get out of the business arrangement is almost exclusively selling, gaining your business, and you're not shopping elsewhere. As much as they can provide you, you're shopping with them, and they're getting some dedicated sales. And then you have the convenience of having a warehouse full of the parts that you want in your, a supply house in your own warehouse or at your own location.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference. So I guess on the controller CFO side, I remember the different stages towards the end after we had sold to private equity, everything. And I think this would be a good conversation maybe for another webinar, but how the conversation changes as you get closer to your exit strategy, how it goes from revenue as the top priority to then EBITDA being your top priority. Once you get to EBITDA, that's where you really dial in all of your systems processes. You're looking at every penny, because every penny in your multiplier, could be 10 cents. And so you have to really dial that in. And so maybe that's a conversation for a different webinar. But I think it was fun to see the leadership and how we spoke differently as we grew, because eventually it really did come down to how much money can we save versus how much money can we bring in. So, or I guess revenue can we bring in. All right, going into processes, systems. There was always a battle between sales and install. They were never happy. They always hated each other. What were ways that you bridged the gap, created that cohesiveness between the two? What did you implement? How did that work?
Many times I've heard from an installer that our salesman needs to be replaced or retrained. And many times I've heard from my salesperson that our installers have no skills and should be fired, right? So I don't think that's unique to our business. I think they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. There's a business relationship where one person gives options and makes promises and the other person has to fulfill it. And they don't have to be at odds, but we tried finding a way to ease as much of that transition as possible to make sure that handoff was smooth, to make sure the expectation on the installer was as clear as possible. And if you think back to like earlier in the process that I described, generally jobs go the smoothest when the person who bids the work is the one who does the work, because they know all the nuance, they understand what the customer values, they already visually like walked the job, they were physically on the job and kind of imagined how they would do that. So when they're sourcing material, they know what to find. And you kind of lose some of that when you have somebody bid it and someone else do it. So if you can imagine, we need to hand off that work as best as possible. And so we created a sole job process, is the term we used, and a sole job form that was required on all jobs. So when we built this install department, there would be no job that they would do without following this process. This was a mandatory thing that was dictated in our company. So if you sold a job and you wanted someone else to install it for you, you had to jump through a few hoops to make sure that the install team could execute. And so it started with a form to fill out and job site pictures and videos to make sure that the person going to the job was educated. So it started with pictures. Let's just start there. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, and no form can be as valuable as a couple pictures usually. But that evolved to being a walkthrough video where we would have the salesperson take their phone out or tablet out and walk through the job, videoing and talking through this is what was sold, this is what the customer and I talked about. And we would even encourage the customer to be on that recording and towards the end say, point that camera to the customer. Did you have any questions? Is there anything I missed? And the customer would say, no, that sounds great. And that went a long way to making sure that the installer was set up for success. But with the form, we wanted to make sure that our office was set up for success as well. Sometimes there are multi-stage jobs, like a rough and finish might be just the simplest example. But there can be all kinds of things that are needed. Sourcing a part that is not in stock at a local vendor, pulling a permit before the work begins. There are tons of different things that need to be thought through to properly get a work order completed. And so we would ask those questions in our sold job form, and whatever would apply to your business, you could ask in your form as well if this is something that you wanted to do, to make sure that we gained as much information from the salesperson as possible. And then that form was reviewed by a manager in the business, and they were watching for a couple things. They wanted to make sure the job made sense, like what was promised and sold to the customer was going to be a benefit to that customer, as well as like could be done. You didn't want to overpromise something. They were also in charge of protecting our profitability. So they were going to make sure that what we were going to install based off the parts list included in our form kind of matched up with the line items and charges that we had given, and that there was no manipulation of any compensation system going on. If you find a way to reward your salespeople for their success, I'm sure they will all try to find some sort of loophole to earn. I could tell, Martin, you've been there. They'll try to find every loophole that they can, and so they're going to protect the business and protect the client, and then they accept that work it has been planned out well, and it gets pushed over to our office to plan, schedule, stage. I could go on, but I want to give you time, Timothy, to jump in because I've been rambling.
No, you're good. So after that form is submitted and it's reviewed by the manager, approved, what happens from there? I would love to hear the process that gets to the installer and them actually fulfilling the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we would just use a few automation triggers, and we had Wink help us with that. And I know obviously Wink is here putting this on, and so that makes sense. But we would use Wink's automations to trigger when that job was booked, to populate that job on a spreadsheet for tracking purposes. And we would track all kinds of things. For street digs, we would need to order barricades and close the street off, or have a plan to get pedestrians around our work. If it was with the power company, we would need to schedule with them or pull a permit for certain types of jobs. We would need to source that equipment. And so every step of actually planning a job correctly, and it even goes down to calling the customer in advance and simply just saying, we have you on our schedule. We appreciate your trust. We're coming on this day. Does that sound right to you? Just the conversation with the customer. Every step of the way was built into this spreadsheet so we can make sure that our client wasn't going to cancel on us in some way, or when we went out there, that we could actually fulfill our promise, have some success, be efficient, get our installer to a job that could be done as quickly as possible, keep their stress down. Everyone's stress is high in these situations. We want things to go smooth for our client and for our installer.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess just one more question. Who ordered the parts? How did they get replenished? What did that look like? And then I'll move on to, I guess, building that relationship between the two departments.
Yeah, at the point of company growth where we had this form built, we did have our own warehouse team. So they were in charge of sourcing parts that were on the sold job forms. And so we did have a VMI and a consignment. We had our own HVAC and equipment in our warehouse that was owned by the supplier until we used it. And we stocked water heaters and breaker panels and all kinds of commonly used items for us to just pull it off our shelves. It was the price we knew we were going to pay. It was the product we were comfortable and trained to install, and we were more efficient that way. But our warehouse team would pull those parts and stage it to make life simpler for our install team, where they would show up, review the job, take ownership of the job mentally. But they had been given the assist from our salesperson of a lot of good information and the assist from our warehouse with sourcing parts ahead of time. What we didn't want was 2 hours wasted every morning shopping for parts for a job you've never even seen before, because then you're going to get to the job and know you need more parts pretty quickly and go shopping again. And so we just want our install crew staying on the job, doing what they do best, and getting that wrench time in.
Okay, perfect. And just so everybody knows, this is open to questions. So if you, along this process, if you're like, man, I want to ask this question to Jason, for sure, either send in a comment in the chat or just unmute yourself and then ask a question. So does anybody have any questions, I guess, before we move into how they created, I guess, a relationship between salespeople and the install team and how they again, bridge that gap, not only on the install side, but on a relationship side where they weren't at each other's throats all the time?
I've got just a couple of questions and comments. First of all, the form itself, it was a form in Service Titan, right, Jason? And I remember you spent a lot of time building that out. And I think that you still have some of those copies of those forms that you could be shared with, Wink customers potentially.
Yeah, for sure. We have a copy for each trade. The business we were electrical, plumbing, drains, and HVAC, and so each form was kind of tailored for the unique nuance of each trade. And so they went through multiple iterations. When we found something that was missing, we added it. And we just had a saying in the business of like, progress, not perfection. And so we got the form planned out as best as we could at first. And then as we ran into problems, we just made edits to it to make it a little bit better, solve for those edge cases that we didn't know we were going to have. The first one we had is long gone, and it gets improved
Yeah.
everything over time.
Yeah, and I remember when we started doing this and rolling it out, it was a culture shift for our salesmen and our installers. Salesmen are like, "What the heck, man? I just sold this job. I just get it installed." And we are like, "No, you got to do this whole job for them." "Oh no!" And then they would complain about it, and then once they realize, just kind of like with a kid, once they realize that they have to do it, there's just no way around it. Guess what? Then they start doing it, and then they all of a sudden they start liking it. And they start realizing that, hey, if I just zone in and I get all the information on this full sold job form done, then I can mentally walk away from this job and not have to be worried about the office calling me and bugging me about everything. And that was huge for me. And then the process we talked about, where once an install job was booked, we had that we called it the dream team board, but it was basically it was any job that had been marked sold but was not completed yet. So it could be at the very early stage of planning weeks ahead, or it could be a same day job. But it would go on the sheet, and then the install coordinators, which are basically dispatchers for the installers, they would go through and add, does it need a permit? Do we do this, and that? And that sheet evolved over time a ton. But it was so nice for me running the company, especially on those really busy months where you're trying to hit your budget goal. Let's say it was $3 million for that month in July or something. I'd be seeing the sales come in, which is great. You love seeing sales, but then sometimes you're not seeing that completed revenue, and you're like, where the hell's all these sales that everybody's been saying? And that's where we'd go. We'd go to that sheet and we'd say, okay, they were grouped up. All these are jobs that were scheduled but on hold. These are jobs that are not scheduled and customers aren't calling us back. Those are where jobs and the hold list, Jason called it, where jobs go to die. And we'd find out that maybe the job really wasn't sold. The salesman just marked it sold, or the customer said yes, but they really weren't planning on it. And so that helped us out a ton. And then it also helped us a ton with the accounts receivable, because at the end of that process, it was then in a section that said completed and unpaid, and it wouldn't leave that person's radar until it was completed and paid. And so that was really powerful for me. That's a really easy thing for us to do for Wink customers. And I struggled for a long time with Service Titan, just to be able to see what get that view of all the open work orders and how much money was in there. And it was a game changer. Jason, anything you want to maybe add to that, because you kind of own that process?
Yeah, there's something I want to say about the form as well. So, you had mentioned the salespeople ended up liking it in the end, and one of the reasons why is it could draw a line between what they had scoped and called for and not. Previous to having this form, we would tell our salesperson, call in the equipment, and then the installer would pick it up in the morning. And we'll just use the HVAC job as an example. And let's say they picked up a 3-ton air conditioner, and then it was the wrong size and the customer had a bunch of trouble. Then it was just a bunch of finger pointing between, well, I installed what I picked up that you called in. Well, I told the warehouse, to the supply house, that I wanted a 3-ton, not a 4-ton, and all this kind of. So when it is really specific and in black and white, it made it really easy just to wash their hands of it and said, hey, I gave you all the information to do it right. And then if you put in a different air conditioner, that's on the installer, not on me. So it helped them. But shifting back to that Dream Team board, it did evolve quite a bit over time. It served whatever need we had what we had for the business, so that we could make sure we weren't dropping the ball on our client, because we have found that whatever software we used ServiceMate, we've used Service Titan, and several others. No matter what we use, we found the software to be kind of lacking when it came to tracking the status of sold work. We needed to know where we were at in the process, what needed to be done, because I described a few things, and so did Dan. The permit process, sourcing a weird part, working with the power company, getting a traffic control plan approved with the city. Whatever it is in your business and with your trade, there's usually always some nuance to work out. And sometimes there's multiple nuances for one project that need to be hammered out. And the software we use never seemed to solve those issues. And so when we could customize to build a tracker in whatever way worked for us, it really made things really efficient. And I know that Dan, as the owner, or eventually when I was the general manager of that business, made it really nice to be able to say, how much money do I have in work orders that are electrical that are going to be closed this month? And we would just keep track of all that in a realistic way, because a lot of these work orders are not on the schedule, or if they are, the final visit's not on the schedule, right? Because that there are things that need to happen down the road in the order of operations for construction.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I'll throw just one more thing in there. One going into building this install department, because we went through a transition. We always had an HVAC install department, but then we had to go and create electrical, plumbing, and drains install departments. And we were like, we were going to have these super high paid experts to be able to manage this install process, because they need to understand the jobs and everything. And the guys I partnered with, they're like, well, no, you got to build the process. And so when it was all said and done, we had a really good dispatcher that became our install manager or coordinator or whatever. And she didn't ever install units or anything like that, but the system was designed so that somebody like her could do her job without having to have her be an experienced manager or technician. And it's a combination of them leaning on the service managers a little bit and leaning on maybe some others in the business, but having her be able to operate that big of a department and doing so well, that was something that I thought was really impressive. Based on my thought before that, just thinking I was going to hire 3 different $100,000 a year guys to be able to do this.
When we built the sole job form, the thing to add to that would be it provides a benefit to multiple teams. So the questions we're asking there will make sure that the install team understands the full project. but it also needs to solve the purpose of how does the warehouse team source all the parts? How do they know what needs to be done for renting equipment? How does the office need, what do they need to know for how much time to book for that, or how big of a team, right? Is it 3 days for two guys, or is it, 5 days for eight guys? Who knows, right? And so whatever it is with permits or whatever, every step of planning, that one form was giving every facet or every side of the business what they needed to plan the job. And so if we were missing a question related to how to handle something, it was in that form to make sure that everybody had what they needed. And so when the manager approved that form, like Dan mentioned before, the salesperson could wash their hands of it generally.
Yeah. The only thing that I'll add, and this is on the more accounting side, was again, I don't want to go too deep into this, but how the sold job process, because we had set up our compensations, and that it really shined once we executed on the sold job process, because our salespeople were paid commissions off of gross profit, and they were always blame the installers for not being efficient. Well, now they increased their efficiency because they had all the transparent information. They had a warehouse that was staging all the parts. And then the installers were always before complaining about, because they were paid off of task pay, they weren't getting enough jobs completed in an efficient way or a billable hourly rate. And so it allowed them to be able to finish their jobs much more efficiently, where they could now get paid the same amount for working 6 hours versus 10 hours. And so for them, it was a massive benefit as well. So align your compensation and design that sold job process to allow people to make as much money as possible through efficiencies. So, okay, all right, moving into the conflict and looking at what we call the win-win-win, where we had salespeople who were constantly mad at the installers. Installers were always mad at salespeople, and then the end result was a unhappy customer. What were some of the things that you installed into the business, either culturally or through other ways, that ended with that win-win-win, where we ended up having a happy customer, good review, and everyone was happy in the end? What were some of those things that you would say were pivotal for that?
Well, I would say we didn't have it all figured out, but we started in a place of pain, right? When you have a salesperson say, this person can't install my job, and a different installer saying, I will not install for this salesperson, and a helper say, I won't work with this lead, it creates a situation that can't be managed effectively. So we wanted to get rid of all that conflict. And so I do think it starts with compensation. When we are all aligning the business goal with the end result, what we were looking for. If you're only paying someone to spend time on the job, they will spend time, and it may not mean success. But if you can align your compensation with what works for you, a more profitable job means that they will make more money. Then you're on the same team. Management's on the same team with the installer. The installer's on the same team with the salesperson, and they're kind of working together to gain that efficiency as well, because they both win if the job is planned out well and efficient. And so that's probably where it starts. But we also made some moves to try to increase the friendship and camaraderie between install and sales. And so the company would provide breakfast or lunches or throw a party, and we would bring those teams together on purpose, right? To get them talking, to get them friendly, to get them fond of each other. And so when we have fun together, it makes it easier to, see somebody as somebody who can be forgiven for if they mess something up one time, right? We also used to have separate meetings. We would teach install skills to installers and sales skills to sales people, and we thought that was so smart. And then we realized we were missing bringing them together so they could collaborate. So we did start having some meetings. We still had those meetings. So it wasn't every time, but we would maybe once a month bring teams together and constructively talk about how things are going, or what does the whole process look like, or what can we teach that benefits both teams, like soft skills, or where to park, and how to dress, and company standards and things like that. And then just bring the teams together with the unified goal of how can we improve. And there was a lot of those meetings, if done right. And I would urge you at first, if you're having conflict here, to bring more managers into that meeting than you think you need in case it goes sideways on you. But when done well, I heard from many different people on both sides saying, I didn't see it that way. So we started getting into ride along situations. Put yourself in their shoes. So when we could afford to, generally in slower days or slower seasons, if you install, why don't you ride with a salesperson and see what it's like? Figure out what it means to have to build rapport and pitch a $20,000 price to a really stressed out client, and type up 5 options, even though you don't even know if they're going to do any of them. And if they do, they're only going to do one of them. So you're wasting all this time. So let them see and feel all the stresses that a salesperson goes through, and vice versa. Have the salesperson go to install jobs, not just to walk through, and that's a healthy thing as well, is start their day with a job walkthrough. Um, go visit a job, introduce a client to the install team, show them around, bring donuts, bring a coffee, whatever it is that can help, kind of ease any of that tension. That helps. But go with them for a day and install. See what it's like to be in a crawl space all day. Or be on a roof and it be 100 degrees outside. Sorry, Fahrenheit. I apologize. But you can tell where I'm from. But on a hot day on a hot roof, and they're going to see what it's like, that the other team has to go through, right? So things like that really helped bring the team together, make them see things from the other side. We actually went as far as had our dispatchers and install coordinators go visit and run service calls, or go visit and install, so they could see when they were asking somebody, hey, go do this, what is it like, to try to bring unity from all sides. Because the last thing you want is a bunch of finger pointing in your business, that the dispatcher's too pushy and they don't understand, and the service tech's too whiny because he doesn't want to run a late call or whatever it is. So that can go a long way.
Awesome. I know we're only got about 10 minutes left. Another big portion of operations was managing the fleet and warehouse. Let's just go into fleet for now. I guess, how many trucks did the company that you worked for, how many trucks were you maintaining? What were some of the, I guess, the nuggets that you could give in this webinar that helped with maintaining so many vehicles that are out on the road?
You want to take this one, Dan, or do you want me to go?
Yeah, I can take this one. This was
Okay.
I was always pretty heavily on the fleet side. So a couple of things. First off, I highly recommend getting the same brand of vehicle. The same. We did Ford Transit vans. I'm not sure out in Australia what the go-to vans are out there, but they had the short ones, the medium ones, and the high ones. But I would only get those. The only time I didn't is during COVID, and I bought some Dodges and I regretted it. But just having the same thing over and over again, it was just very helpful when it came to repairs, maintenance, that type of thing. And then having emphasis on safety was the big thing for me. These vans, I know out there, Jason, you probably haven't been out to Australia, but out there, like, there's not a lot of full-size vehicles, so it's a little different. But it's a big, heavy van full of tools and parts, and and it's dangerous. And every day that you got 100 vans out there driving around, it's like I'm just keep my fingers crossed that we're not going to have an accident, and luckily we did pretty well and avoided, anything, catastrophic. But it's dangerous, and so every meeting I had with the technicians, I would always make sure to bring up driving, especially during the winter times, and then making sure that the guys know that I appreciate them and I appreciate them driving smoothly. We also did GPS tracking that Jason can maybe talk a little bit about that. That helped out a lot, and then maintaining the fleet. I hated paying mechanics. I've never really trusted them, and so I always hated taking a van to the mechanic and just being at his mercy on what he comes with. And so I had a pretty small. I'm not sure how big we were when we got a mechanic, but eventually we got a mechanic, an in-house mechanic, and he was awesome. And he was a little bit older on the tail end of his career, and he valued having not having to deal with politics with other mechanics or having to deal with customers. He just wanted to, fix vans and repair them. And so having that was huge because we do oil changes during text meetings. He could really, flip a van really quickly. I mean, he even did, transmission swap outs and engine swap outs and stuff. And so that was a big, it was a time saver for us because we weren't, having vans parked down the street at a mechanic shop, and then instead they were at our building, and we were able to do the maintenance in-house and for a good price. And so I think that's something to consider. Maybe when you get to 10, 15, 20 trucks, you can look at what your total expenses are and see if it would make sense. But at some point, it's going to make sense to have that. And another option, if you're not ready for a full-on mechanic, is get somebody like I found that you can find a helper. We did this in St. George in the department that Timothy built. Is we didn't have the budget for a full mechanic, but we had a helper that was just his dad was a mechanic or something, and so we had him do the lighter stuff that he could do without having a full shop, and then we would have the major repairs done by somebody else. And then if there wasn't anything like that need to be done that day, we'd have him go be a helper on a job, or we'd have him run parts or something like that. And so I think that's another thing that helped out a lot with the fleet. Jason, you want to talk a little about GPS, maybe some of the funny stories we had over the years tracking those vans?
Yeah, I would just start by saying that has to be a non-negotiable. You do need to track all your vans. You can make good decisions in your business if you can see where they are and what decisions your technicians are making. We found all kinds of bad situations where people were stealing from us and driving their van all around and buying rolls of copper wire and then going to a scrap yard just to then scrap it for the its base cost, and just embarrassing things like that you just don't know unless you can see. But to hit on safety a little bit, these devices will give you a safety scorecard and tell you when your team is speeding and tell you when your team is hard braking. And to us, hard braking meant you're looking at your phone while you're driving. That's kind of what we saw, because you could hard brake a little bit once in a while when someone cuts you off or something, but generally you're not paying attention. And so for us, that was a stop looking at your phone type of thing. And so for the safety of your team and for the safety of others, because at the time, we had over 100 vehicles and trailers and pieces of equipment. I think it was like 120 when I left the business that we needed to watch over. That's a huge expense, huge liability, and insurance costs. Being as risky as they are, you want to keep your team protected and safe. And so safety training is one thing, but actually watching along with where they're going and what they're doing and their driving behavior does help. So if you're scorecarding your technicians, and we can help with that to create great scorecards for your technicians' performance on the job or driving, if that type of thing, we can help you rank your technicians' performance with compliance to safety or rules or how they're doing on their jobs. Those things can be invaluable, especially when you just get those out in front of the team so they can see it. Sometimes just a little bit of peer pressure can make a huge difference. Oh, I better sell more, or oh, I better slow down because I am far and away the worst driver here, and I don't want to be made fun of anymore or teased by my team that I'm such a dangerous driver or whatever. So, yeah, definitely get
I wanted to
GPSs in
add.
your vehicles.
Yeah, one more little story to that. Our insurance guy, I had a really good insurance guy that I would, if there was anything that pulled up on their driving record when we hired them, I'd have to ask him if he was going to allow it. And he told me something that stuck with me forever was like, hey, if you hire a guy and he's got a couple of tickets or just, a DUI from a long time ago or something, the odds of that employee being a good long-term employee is pretty low. And so you're sitting, I remember so many times I was like, we got to hire this installer, but he's got this driving record, and you'd be like, no. And I look back and I think, the somebody's driving record really does reflect their level of responsibility, and it goes a long ways. And so I think if I was to go back in time, I would have never hired some of the guys that are going through your head right now, Jason. And knowing that what we got out of them afterwards when we find out that they're stealing stuff from us, or taking the van out in the middle of the night or things like that. So it does. I'm guessing they in Australia they do the driving reports like out here. But anyway, that was really helpful for us.
Cool. Thank you. I know that we've only got a couple more minutes. I do want to say it's probably a little bit different. We've got, winter storms that we got to worry about, but I was told by our CTO that the kangaroos are what you have to watch out for. He told me about how he's hit a few kangaroos while driving. So it sounds like it's a different safety hazard that you guys have got there than what we've got here in the States. But anyway, would love to open it up. Let's maybe just have a minute or two of questions. Love to open this up for questions for anybody who has anything that they want to pick our brains, or send it through the chat, or just unmute yourself and ask. If not, I'm gonna have Jason tell some stupid joke or something.
I've got a question
Yep, go ahead, Catherine.
just regarding the form, the sold estimate form, essentially, or the sold job form. We do something similar. However, one of the nuances that we have found is that if we were to complete the form on every estimate provided or every estimate on an opportunity, the technicians then needs to fill the form out maybe 3 different times for 3 different options that have been provided. And then on the contrary to that, if they only fill the form out when they sell the estimate on site, we are sometimes in a case where the estimate's sold after the fact, where the technician's not necessarily on site anymore. Like, how do you manage that?
We've been there. I understand the pain, and I honestly don't think I'm going to give you an answer that's going to completely solve it, because it's going to be somewhere in between both extremes. In a perfect world, there's a form filled out on every estimate so that when it sells, it's instantly done. But we found that was somewhat unreasonable, because we were also pushing our technicians to give as many options as possible. We wanted between 5 and 7 options. And so that kind of fill out a form for every estimate quickly became fill out a form to the one that you recommended to them or that you think they're going to do, and we'll modify it from there. But if that's not done, so if you're in the situation of the job is sold and now you need to get that information from your salesperson before you can execute, that can create a pain point in your business if that salesperson forgets what needs to be done. So that's where the job site videos that they would have recorded ahead of time, walking through the job and showing the installers around, can be very important or helpful. But we just got to a point where since we were in control of the schedule, we needed the salesperson to fill out that form before they got their next opportunity to do. And so it's like, take the time to do the form, then we'll give you your next sales call. But until then, since it's so important to us to execute and earn this revenue and collect on it, since that was so important, that we would do that. We would make sure that form was filled out. If a salesperson could not get it done, we would just book an appointment to go back to that job. So there was times that a manager would go visit the job, but there were also times that we would just book to have the salesperson go back out. So if you could imagine a salesperson visiting 3 weeks ago and speaking to 100 clients, that might be too much, but speaking to a bunch of clients since then and not being able to recreate that form accurately, we would just say, okay, since you needed time to think about it, we need to go plan this job. So we would send that salesperson out, hopefully same day, if not next day, to go to the home and get the information needed. Take that video, take the measurements, fill everything out, create a good parts list, etc.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining. We will be continuing these webinars, these expert hours, and hopefully helping people scale their businesses and eventually, if you guys are choosing to sell it and be able to retire. So, all right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jason, for being our special guest. I appreciate all your words of wisdom.
Yep.
All right.
Thanks,
See you,
thanks,
everybody.
Joe, for joining us, Jason. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much.
See ya.